Hey, Jake Williams from Rendition Infosec here. I want to chat a little bit about electronic voting. Seen a couple of stories here in the past 48 hours about electronic voting. One of those was pretty interesting and dealt with used e-voting machines that were purchased on eBay and still contained voter data. Ruh-roh, Raggy. Look, this surprises literally nobody that's been following electronic voting for any period of time. If you were at B-Sides Augusta last year, you and stopped by the Rendition Infosec booth, you saw one of our electronic voting machines also purchased off of eBay that also contained user data, or voter data, excuse me. I have to kind of step back and say that this is kind of a non-story. Although, look, I say that from the perspective of an InfoSec researcher who has purchased voting equipment in the past and had data on that voting equipment. So, while I would like to say not surprised, and I'm not surprised, the general public, I think, is very much surprised just how the story gets past an editor yet again, right? Even though it seems like the same old news. I feel like kind of kicking back to John Oliver last week tonight. He did a story 2 years ago, year ago, whatever, on credit reporting agencies like Equifax, and how they have a horrible history of getting it right. And in fact, found people. He kind of goes back and they scour back through the news and they find dozens of cases of basically local news and even national news doing stories about this, and it's one of those perennial stories where nothing ever changes. So hey, you know what? Maybe researcher buys a used voting equipment and finds that, surprise, there's still real user data on it. Maybe that just becomes a perennial story there too. Voter data, who knows? Bottom line, I think there is a takeaway here, and the takeaway really is going to involve, at least for me, the takeaway involves the fact that there is no universal sanitization standard for cleaning ultimately for cleaning one of these devices before it's ready for sale, right? So I think that's probably my big takeaway there, is that we need to have a national standard or a minimum a state standard, because right now every local election commission is responsible. Again, they largely have a number of unfunded mandates around security. This is certainly would be seen as one and the same. So I think that's probably an interesting piece to consider there, as well. Second story I wanted to talk about was in Texas. There have been some voting irregularities noted, specific to the electronic voting machines, and very specifically when people click and say that they want to vote along a party line, whether that be Democrat, Republican, Silver Fox, Dynamite Panda, whatever. Actually, that last one I made up. I don't think that's a political party yet, right? But look, bottom line, people check the box and say, hey, I want to vote all the way down party lines, and then they're reporting that when they go review their votes, that's not actually what's being recorded. This is kind of interesting, and there's been some suggestion that possibly the machines were misprogrammed, or that the users didn't understand how to actually click the buttons, or any of that. Well, I honestly think this really brings to light something that we really haven't talked a lot about in electronic voting, and that's user interface design, right? So UI design. It's no secret, and you can Google and go back through and look at how there have been a lot of fights over the paper ballots and how those ballots are constructed, how the questions are worded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So obviously, electronic voting won't be free of that either. Obviously, when you word a question, I would expect that question should be worded identically on a paper versus an electronic ballot. But how you present that question, how you present the yes and the no boxes, where those boxes get checked, do they screen wrap, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what font is being used for different pieces of the text. This is all stuff that to my knowledge, has not really been studied. The one thing that I'm positive about, is that these electronic voting equipment manufacturers have not had a large-scale randomized controls trial about how different UI components, user interface components, actually impact how real users vote, right, or real voters vote. Now, obviously, if we had this information, I would expect different political parties to be playing games with this. I don't think any one of them is immune. I think everybody wants every advantage they can get. If not, why are you playing the game in the first place? But I have to ask at this point, kind of kicking back around a little bit on on the whole voting piece, the electronic voting piece, and the fact that there's even a suggestion, and I say even a suggestion, a credible suggestion, news media has been reporting on, that it may indeed be the user interface and that people don't understand how to vote. Well, look, I consider this still to be a problem, voting being a very, very fundamental right. We certainly do need to make sure that we have a good way to ensure that everybody's vote counts and everybody's vote counts the way they intended to vote, and that that's all consistent. Now, as we talk about this here, this challenge is actually a little bit bigger than you might expect because we have a very, very wide range of people voting, all the way people from 18 years old, all the way up to, 100 plus years old, right? And they have to be able to see that ballot and respond to that ballot identically. And unless you think that this is a non, or excuse me, unless you think this is a trivial problem or just a non-problem in the first place, I would like to suggest that first, it's not a non-problem. It's definitely a problem, and I would suggest you think about Windows 8. Right? Windows 8, the UI, I think we can all agree was an abomination. But that said, Microsoft did a lot of study with Windows 8. Right? They brought in a bunch of people who hadn't necessarily used computers before, weren't supercomputer literate, and said, look, kind of walk us through the process. How would you use, this computer, right? What they're doing here is they're basically backing away from 20 years to the start bar or 15 years to the start bar and saying, okay, if we didn't have this, if you didn't have this foreknowledge about how things were supposed to work, right? How would you actively use, the operating system? And look, Office 2013, 2017, Windows 8, et cetera, that all comes out of this, right? Now, whether or not you think that's important, whether or not you think that they made a mistake with the UI, just know that that's what they were doing with the user interface, and that people who had a pre-existing knowledge of the start bar and other features of the OS, like myself, absolutely didn't like the new UI. I can live with Windows 10. I absolutely could not live with Windows 8 prior to the start bar, when it was 100% tile apps and just craziness that was just ugh. Anyway, it was my foreknowledge of the way things were supposed to work that hurt my basically hurt my ability to use Windows 8 in its native form without reskinning it. Now I'll mention that my kid, who largely hadn't been poisoned, jumped right in, and she touch screened all the way and was reaching out and tapping stuff on the screen here and there. And I got to tell you, this new Windows laptop I bought, I intentionally did not get a touch screen on it because it bothers the heck out of me when I'll be pointing something on the screen and then bam, it taps. I accidentally tap the screen and it moves. No, but my kid absolutely gravitated to that, and she loves it. Right now, as I take a look at this, I got to kind of step back and say, maybe are some of the voting problems that we're running into, are these, I say voting problems we're running into, the reported voting problems that we're already seeing in Texas where they have early voting and electronic voting. Are we going to see more of this, around the country? Obviously, everybody's interested in reporting on this. I don't think this is the first year it's happened. I think this is the first year that people are really paying attention, right? That said, that there could be something malicious here. I don't think there is. I think right off the bat, the first thing that strikes me is that we probably need better studies around how across generations, also counting that there are people that have seen the start bar in the case of electronic voting. They've seen a paper ballot. They've used paper ballots. And for you to come in today and say, hey, don't worry, we checked this, we did this e-voting thing. Don't worry, it's going to work just the same. That's not even close to true, right? E-voting works, granted, I understand we're still casting a vote, but again, positionally, how does that all lay out? Just because it looked, well, any web designer is going to tell you right off the bat that again, things look different in Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Internet Explorer. Right? Or let's say that you're on mobile, right? And you're in, you're on a mobile device or a low resolution device or whatever the case is. Obviously, we have to account for that. So as we look at different models of voting machines, I suspect that there's probably some of that as well, right? Where we have different models having different user interfaces, different resolutions, etc. Or maybe it looked fine in the design software, right? Everything laid out appropriately, and then it doesn't quite lay out okay on the on the e-voting machine. What does it look like when you need high contrast versus the larger font, which I know some of the electronic voting machines support? Does that then word wrap the boxes, right, where the boxes are no longer positioned in an easy to select manner? Again, these are all things I don't know, but I would like to point out that, again, this is stuff that I don't believe we've studied up to this point, and definitely need to, from a security standpoint, right? Because remember, availability, as we talk about security, it's CINA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. One of the availability pieces here is usability, right? If I can change the user interface, right, in a way that makes the system available to you without really being available to you to do your bidding, right? That is itself an attack, right? And as we do some more of these studies, or maybe these studies have been done clandestinely and I just haven't heard about them, or maybe they've been done in open academia and I haven't heard about them. But again, I'd like to kind of pitch here that again, if we're not doing these, I suspect somebody else probably is and is trying to mold those ballots, those electronic ballots, in a way that the best suits them. So anyway, enough about the electronic voting thing. I could probably go on all day about just nastiness with electronic voting and poll books and security around those and all that good stuff. But I think this is probably a good spot to kill it. Please go out and vote. That definitely go out and vote. Right, cast an absentee ballot if you're in Georgia, like I am. You may well have been purged from the rolls for any number of reasons this year. Apparently, we're doing the purge Georgia style, but of course, cast a provisional ballot. Where possible, get a receipt for said ballot, or that you actively cast that provisional ballot. And look, there's no question this one's going to be one for the record books here. I say one for the record books. Who knows how close anything's going to be, but obviously, get out and vote. And if you notice any interesting, irregularities specifically surrounding electronic voting, for instance, you see people plugging in USB ports or USB drives into ports, or you see just bad digital security overall. Give me a shout. Hit me up on social media, Malware Jake. We're on LinkedIn. Certainly any of the above, and I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to signal amplify that for you as well, because we have not solved the electronic voting security problem. That is still a very, very real problem out there. It's not going to get solved anytime soon. And anyway, definitely not for this election. All right. So anyway, Jake Williams with Rendition Infosec, signing off.